Welcome to the Explainer. Today we're diving into something that literally shapes our every waking moment, from our daily routines to our deepest habits, and really society as a whole. We're going to explore the institutional exploitation of evolutionary mismatch. We'll be moving beyond this popular, somewhat catchy idea of limbic capitalism to uncover what's actually driving our modern compulsions. Think about it for a second. We have to ask ourselves a question that pretty much defines modern existence. Why does modern life feel so entirely engineered to be addictive? Whether we're talking about that endless, mindless scroll on our phones, our constant cravings for ultra-processed foods, or just our unbreakable digital habits in general. It honestly feels like everything is designed to hook us, right? But why? And more importantly, who or what is actually pulling the strings here? Let's kick things off with Section 1, the Limbic Capitalism theory. To really grasp this, we need to start with a very popular diagnosis by historian David Courtwright. He points to this incredibly real phenomenon called evolutionary mismatch. Basically, this is the tendency for evolved human preferences to operate, well, pretty poorly in modern environments that are radically different from the ones where those preferences originally developed. Simply put, our ancient brains are just completely out of sync with the high-speed modern world we live in today. And wow, have modern institutions gotten good at exploiting this. They have become incredibly sophisticated at monetizing our ancient reward circuits with just staggering precision. I mean, food manufacturers are literally engineering the absolute perfect, irresistible ratios of sugar, salt, and fat. Social media platforms aren't just guessing what keeps you scrolling, they're running continuous real-time A/B tests on millions of users. You've got gambling companies leveraging variable reward schedules, and app designers mapping out our habits down to the exact millisecond. It's intense. So Courtwright looks at these commercial markets and their massive technological sophistication, and he places the blame squarely on the economic system itself. He calls this phenomenon limbic capitalism, basically capitalism's evil twin. And yeah, it's a super compelling narrative. But, as we're going to see, if we zoom out just a little bit, blaming capitalism as a standalone actor actually reveals a major blind spot. Which brings us to Section 2, the public choice problem. When we look at these markets, we really have to consider what happens when the government gets involved. Economic historian Burton Folsom makes this absolutely crucial distinction between market entrepreneurs and political entrepreneurs. On the left, you have market entrepreneurs, who prosper purely by persuading consumers to voluntarily trade with them. But over on the right, you have political entrepreneurs. They prosper by getting advantages through the political process. We're talking subsidies, licensing, tariffs, regulatory protections, the whole shebang. This exposes that a lot of these so-called addictive industries actually rely heavily on political machinery, not just the free market. Let's look at a massive counterfactual to prove this. Ask yourself, would modern Las Vegas, the literal global capital of gambling, even exist without the state? We usually view it as the ultimate symbol of unchecked commercial vice. But let's actually look at how it was co-produced. Vegas isn't just commercial vice popping up out of nowhere. First, you had massive federal investment to build the Hoover Dam, which provided the necessary water and power. Second, the state of Nevada deliberately legalized and constructed the regulatory environment for gambling. Third, public funding built the necessary roads and airports to get people there. It was only then, in step 4, that private firms swooped in to capitalize. It is a hybrid arrangement completely co-produced by massive government infrastructure and public choice. Because once the state starts getting revenue from vice, its own incentive structure fundamentally changes. We see this exact same institutional dynamic in Malcolm Gladwell's findings on nutrition. It wasn't just greedy food companies out of nowhere causing the sugar boom. The sugar industry funded research to deflect blame onto saturated fats. Then, government dietary guidelines institutionalized that low-fat paradigm. Responding completely rationally to this new government standard, food manufacturers reformulated their products. They took out the fat and pumped in sugar to keep things tasting good. The end result? Consumers ate way more refined carbohydrates. It was a massive institutional feedback loop. Let's shift gears a bit. Section 3, weaponizing political tribalism. Because let's be honest, hacking our ancient brains goes way beyond junk food and slot machines. The modern political industry uses the exact same psychological triggers to cultivate tribal belonging and this constant sense of existential threat. Social psychologists like Jonathan Haidt have pointed out how campaigns literally monetize moral outrage and fear. They're industrializing our ancient, hardwired instincts for small group coalitions, fusing our partisan identity right into our social identity. every single election is engineered to feel like a fight for survival, which activates some incredibly deep authoritarian predispositions in all of us. And here's the really crucial point. If we're talking about evolutionary mismatch, politics absolutely has to be part of the analysis. In fact, historically, it's the most dangerous form of it. As the source material points out, while commercial vice like gambling or alcohol can tragically ruin households, tribal identity and ideological certainty have historically produced wars, revolutions, and totalitarian regimes on a massive scale. This leads us right into Section 4, Temptation versus Harm. We're looking at a pretty deep philosophical disagreement here. When institutions tap into our evolved psychology, what actually constitutes real harm? Now, Courtwright equates exploitation with any negative social outcome, but Murray Rothbard comes at it with a much stricter classical liberal framework. Rothbard argues that actual harm requires a clear violation of rights. We're talking aggression, the initiation of force, fraud, or the physical invasion of a person or their property. That is a vastly different threshold. Think about how this comparison actually plays out in the real world. Over on the left, we have temptation. This is making food taste better, understanding consumer psychology, and designing an app you really love to use. None of that is aggression. But on the right, we have rights violations, actively concealing dangers, mislabeling ingredients, or committing outright fraud. This distinction is vital, guys. Creating a product that is highly appealing is fundamentally different from committing fraud, and society already has tools, like tort law, to deal with actual rights violations when they happen. Cars are a perfect analogy for this. We don't just optimize cars for safety, right? We build them for speed, for status, for the thrill of the drive, all things that heavily engage our reward systems. If we really applied a strict harm reduction model, we'd legally cap every car's speed at 35 miles per hour to practically eliminate fatalities. But society completely rejects that. We accept a certain level of inherent risk because we want to preserve our mobility and our autonomy. Institutions are constantly optimizing across competing incentives, not just a single moral access of perfect safety. Or consider the Roman aqueducts. If archaeologists discovered that Rome's lead pipes caused neurological harm, they wouldn't just throw their hands up and condemn the entire concept of plumbing or water systems. They'd just condemn the choice to use lead. And just like that aqueduct, the underlying systems of free markets or behavioral science aren't inherently defective or evil, even if one specific implementation of them ends up being dangerous. All right, let's pull all these threads together in our final segment, Section 5, the real institutional threat. To really make sense of this, we have to separate the tool from the intention. As we see at industry events like the Habit Summit, behavioral science is fundamentally morally neutral. The exact same psychological principles used to keep you endlessly, compulsively scrolling on an app or pulling a slot machine lever, those are the exact same principles used to empower people. They help us save money, stick to a workout routine, and remember to take life-saving medication. The knowledge isn't the enemy here. The incentives of whatever institution is using it ultimately determine the outcome. Here is the absolute reality. Modern algorithms and markets did not invent our vulnerabilities. They simply discovered them. Our hardwired ancient human appetites for food, status, belonging, novelty, identity, and meaning, we've always sought these things out. Social media didn't create your desire for recognition, it just put a megaphone to it. It's a deeply, deeply human condition. Whether it's described by a modern psychologist or an ancient philosopher, we've always been prone to misdirected attachments. Going all the way back to Augustine, who famously said, "The human heart is restless until it rests in God." That beautifully reflects this universal human attempt to fill a massive, deeply felt vacuum with finite earthly substitutes. Compulsion and distraction, definitely not new inventions of the digital age. So the big takeaway for this explainer? Capitalism isn't the lone villain here. It's just one system interacting with a fundamentally unchanging human nature. The deepest vulnerability we face actually precedes the marketplace entirely. Throughout history, the institutions always change, from ancient empires to modern tech monopolies. But human nature? It remains exactly the same. I'm going to leave you with this provocative thought to ponder. The defining challenge of our century isn't just about one specific economic system. It's the fact that massive institutions, both public and private, now have an unprecedented scientific capacity to study and shape our behavior. So, which institutions can most effectively exploit the oldest parts of our minds? And how on earth do we hold them accountable without them becoming entangled in the exact same incentives? Thanks for joining me on The Explainer. Keep questioning and keep learning.